In the end, it wasn't just a confession. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was data. Cold, clinical, digital breadcrumbs. And they told the story April never got to finish. In the trial for April Millsap's murder, prosecutors didn't rely on eyewitnesses alone. They leaned on technology. Her MyFitnessPal app, her cell phone records, location tracking, even pedometer data. Step by step, message by message, her final moments were reconstructed with chilling precision. And standing in the middle of it all was James VanCallis, a man with a criminal past, a dirt bike that matched the one spotted on the trail, and a timeline that began to unravel the moment the devices started talking. The defense tried to punch holes. They questioned the tech. They questioned the reliability of the data. But in a world that runs on signals, pings, and patterns, April's digital footprint was louder than any denial. This episode isn't just about the courtroom. It's about how modern forensic tools gave a voice to the voiceless. It's about the way data preserved what April couldn't say out loud. And it's about a verdict that, for once, didn't just name a killer. It honored the fight to find him. Angela, let's talk about how technology became the strongest witness in a case where the victim never got to testify. So, how's it going, Angela? It's been a while.
It has been a while.
It's been a crazy freaking
roller coaster.
Insane roller coaster of chaos and
chaos
hospitals.
Yeah.
Just a freaking
different
mess.
Towns and
living in a freaking motel and yeah.
Not fun at all.
No, it's been a freaking nightmare. So my apologies to the listeners. When you're dealing with medical stuff, you never really can plan for it. You don't really see it coming.
And their timetable.
Emergencies happen, and I just had to throw everything and take off, following a freaking helicopter. So, but I hate it. It sucks for the listeners. Haven't been posting on any kind of a regular schedule, and it just sucks, but
it'll come back. We're not done.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you can only do what you can do, you know? And so, but, when this case finally went to trial, it wasn't just about what people saw. It was about what the data said. April's fitness app didn't just record her steps. It mapped her final movements. Her phone didn't just go dark. It told investigators when, where, and for how long. And all of that evidence pointed to one man, James VanCallis.
This trial was unlike most. It wasn't just a testimony and photos. It was graphs, GPS pings, digital timelines. And when you lay it all out, it reads like a script of April's final walk. Every second accounted for, every step turned into evidence.
Welcome back to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm Angela. And together we'll shine a light on the stories that keep us up at night, the unsolved disappearances, lives stolen too soon, and the questions that refuse to be buried.
In this episode, we're stepping inside the courtroom, where April's data told the jury everything that they needed to know. From expert testimony to damning digital evidence, we'll break down how prosecutors built a case without a single eyewitness to the crime itself.
We'll also talk about James VanCallis, and John will probably call him some names.
Oh, definitely.
His background, his alibi, and how his own cell phone betrayed him. Because in the age of technology, even silence leaves a signal.
Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, follow the show, leave us a review, hit that thumbs up, and share this episode. Every listen helps keep April's story in the public eye.
All right, John, let's talk about the trial, the data, and the fight to bring April Millsap's killer to justice.
All right, so let's jump into this. Jump, slither, roll, crawl.
I'm going to crawl today.
Okay, we're crawling. Let's crawl into this. On April, I guess I should probably I should probably just do a quick recap so we're all on the same page. So
it has been a minute.
It's been a minute. So if you remember the last time we talked about this pile of shit,
there he is.
His piece of shit old man who was a freaking pedophile, and this ass clown who's a pedophile, and it's this whole white trash freaking bunch of losers that I can't stand any of them.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I try to hide it.
You hide it very, very well.
Yeah, I do. I try my very best. And the only one that I have even a lick of any sort of respect for is the girlfriend, because she came forward and was instrumental in getting this piece of shit caught. Other than that, everybody we talked about, him, his dad, his brother, his mother,
his dog,
the whole damn bunch. They're all a bunch of pieces of shit. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
And so on October 2nd, 2014, James Donald VanCallis Jr. was 32, and he was arrested by the Macomb County Sheriff's Office on a murder warrant. And he was already in the St. Clair County Jail because he had too many pot plants. You remember that whole thing? So they had his ass in jail, and then now they're going to go arrest him. And that's always kind of a weird thing. I know my son deals with that as well in the jail. Like, they got to go down there and arrest somebody that's already in custody.
Yeah.
But that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's how the legal system is set up.
You have to put
they have to officially be arrested on those charges.
The new charges have to be official.
So it sounds a little weird.
Very weird.
It's what happens.
At least you find them.
Does.
I mean, at least you can find them.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes the band
all over. Yeah.
Yes. So like I said, he was served at the jail and then transferred to Macomb County for processing. So he was being held in St. Clair County on the marijuana charges. And then, because remember, they lived in a different town. I can't remember the name of it, where their piece of shit, weird ass, quote unquote, mansion with partial electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was in a different place. And so he was arrested by the St. Clair County Sheriff's Office for the pot shit. And then once he was arrested on the murder charges, his custody was transferred then to Macomb County.
Okay.
And then on October 8th, Macomb County prosecutor held a press conference and basically detailed the evidence, the overview of the evidence, and emphasized the random and just, totally unexpected nature of this crime. Like, he didn't know this girl. They didn't have a beef, or he wasn't stalking her. He just happened upon her one day and stomped her to death. The freaking lunatic.
Disgusting.
And so then when he was arraigned, the judge ordered that he be held without bond. And then the community was alerted via text alerts and all that kind of shit. I mean, you can just imagine something like this going on in this tiny little place.
Right.
And then also on October the 8th, that's when all the formal charges, that's when the arraignment was. That's when we found out what exactly the charges were. So they included first-degree premeditated murder, which is intentional killing with planning, felony murder, which is killing during commission of a felony like kidnapping or sexual assault. Here it's felony murder. Other places it would be called capital murder.
Gotcha.
So pretty much the same thing. It's just different states call shit different things. Who's also charged with kidnapping, assault with intent to commit a criminal sexual act. And all of these charges carry mandatory life imprisonment without parole if he's convicted. So there is no death penalty in Michigan, but prosecutors obviously came out and said, we're going to seek the maximum. We want this piece of shit locked up forever, never, ever to walk in the public again. So like I said, the judge denied any kind of a bond. He did have a bond hearing. The judge heard all of his defense's arguments. Then he heard the prosecution's reasons to not give this piece of shit bond. And when he looked at the son of a bitch's prior history, where he had convictions for home invasion, sexual assault intentions, parole violation. I mean, the guy was already a freaking criminal. We talked about that in the last episode. And so it was pretty easy for this judge to be like, no, this son of a bitch is not getting out. So bond was denied. April's mom, Jennifer, and her stepfather, David, were there for this hearing. And obviously it was extremely emotional for them, but they kept their composure, listened. Jennifer, really throughout all the trial and everything, was often crying and stuff. I mean, I can only imagine what this woman's going through.
Yeah.
But they really, maintained their composure and everything.
I don't know if I could do it.
I don't know if I could. You hear so many stories of like the family members that are like, I just wanted to get a hold of the son of a bitch.
Yep.
I think I would likely be one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you see videos of them actually jumping over the freaking little railing and attacking them and stuff. And, I completely understand. I understand their feelings, and I got nothing bad to say about that because that's probably how I would be, And then obviously Piece of Shit's family was also there when we talked about his mom, who just didn't believe that he had anything to do with any of this stuff. And then later in October, the case was bound over to circuit court, and there was testimony from Chief Howard Smith on the details of the attack. I mean, the freaking horrendous details, which we talked about in a previous episode. We went through all the autopsy findings and everything, and it was just unbelievably brutal.
Jeez.
And then on March 12th of 2015, he was evaluated for competency, and he was found to be competent to stand trial. No mental health defenses were then pursued. I mean, they're going to look at every possible way they can to, try to mount some kind of a defense, but there was nothing about this case that even hinted towards that he was mentally deranged. I mean, he's definitely mentally deranged, but not incompetent.
Yeah.
So then obviously, the defense, they go through the whole discovery just like they do in every freaking trial. And then the defense tried to have several pieces of evidence suppressed. A lot of stuff that came from the search warrant, like the computer searches detailing his searches on like how to get a young girl to like you, and how to get young girls to like older guys, and all this sick ass shit. They tried to get all that suppressed. They didn't want his girlfriend's testimony to be allowed, obviously, because it's pretty damning. So the judge listened to all the bullshit and denied it, but he did delay the trial till January of 2016 to allow for preparation. While in jail, the piece of shit was kept isolated for safety reasons. Obviously, he kicked and stomped a 14-year-old girl to death. And so, we know how criminals treat people that hurt children in jail and in prison. So, they kept him locked away for a while during this whole period of time so that somebody wouldn't kill him. And I guess, let's at least wait until he's found guilty. And then if they want to beat him to death, I have no problem with it, especially this piece of shit. I don't know that you could find a penalty that would match it would even come close to matching what he did to this little girl. I don't know. I mean, we've talked about it before, but cases like this are extremely difficult for me. And
paper cuts, salty lemon juice.
Yeah, I just have no problem with, I don't know that there's any amount of pain that you could inflict on this piece of shit that I'd have a problem with after what he did to this little girl. So
it's difficult to take me seriously while I'm
when you're holding a giant stuffed bear.
Holding a giant stuffed teddy bear.
No, not so much.
Okay.
The trial commenced on January 20th, 2016 in Macomb County Circuit Court in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and it lasted about a month through February 5th. Obviously, there was daily sessions, and then the jury deliberations began on February the 5th, and it didn't take them long, but we'll get to that. So the Honorable Mary Ellen Brennan was presiding. She oversaw all the proceedings. She ruled on the motions, did all the judgy shit that judges do. And The prosecution team was led by Macomb County Prosecutor Eric Smith, and he was assisted by his deputies like William Cataldo. And their strategy focused on the circumstantial web, and they painted VanCallis as an opportunistic predator. They opened the trial with the graphic details of the attack, and obviously, that's to invoke empathy from the jury, anger from the jury, outrage from the jury. The defense team was led by Dean Ancuni, and he was appointed as the public defender that was appointed to the case. And he would argue that VanCallis was innocent because there just wasn't enough evidence to convict him. He highlighted that there was no direct evidence. He would cross-examine witnesses, and we'll talk about all this. Obviously, the jury was composed of 12 jurors. It was a mix of both men and women, all of them being local residents, and they were sequestered partially due to the publicity, which, we already talked about. It's a tiny little town. They hadn't had a murder in like 40 years. I know I mentioned it, I think, in episode 1. And so this was freaking everywhere. So the jury was sequestered during this time, and then they were instructed on, circumstantial evidence equals direct evidence. So if you have enough circumstantial evidence, if it's convincing, then it's the same as having direct evidence. So if you have enough circumstantial evidence that the jury's like, oh yeah, this piece of shit did it, right, then that's every bit as good as DNA evidence saying this piece of shit did it. The prosecution, their opening strategy was to lean on the tech evidence. Their core approach to the case, they acknowledged the fact that they had no DNA. They didn't have a confession. They didn't have any eyewitnesses to the attack, but the case was built on the totality of circumstances and the dangerous science of digital forensics. And Prosecutor Smith stated in his opening that, quote, evidence will show VanCallis was there, did it, and covered tracks. And so, like I've said, this case is going to be all circumstantial. The prosecution portrayed VanCallis as frustrated because, he'd had recent fights with his girlfriend and stuff. And so he was out there seeking a vulnerable target. The timeline from the 6:00 walk to the 8:30 discovery, it was all reconstructed using the technology that was available. And, they contrasted this piece of shit with April's innocence, being a 14-year-old girl who wanted to be a veterinarian, who was out there walking her little dog. And then they
stayed healthy.
Right. And then they contrasted that with this piece of shit, and then the violence, the unbelievable violence of the attack. 48 injuries to this poor little girl. And we talked about, being stomped on and shit. So they relied on tech to prove his presence there, to prove that he had opportunity, and then to also show his post-crime movements, what he did after the fact. And then, so they started with the first responders when they started calling witnesses. They wanted to hear what these poor, and, so many times, or usually actually, your first responders just get forgotten about. They're just doing their job, and that's what they're paid to do. And so we don't really talk about it. But as a first responder, when you arrive to the scene, and thank God I've never encountered this as a first responder, but I can only imagine what these poor people were going through, arriving on the scene of this 14-year-old girl that had been stomped to death by this piece of shit, and then the impact that has on their psyche and their mental health for the rest of their lives. And, in those first responders, it's not just paramedics, EMTs, firefighters, it's also the cops that are on the scene, and again, we're in this tiny little town, and these cops had never seen a murder, at least not here. Obviously, I don't know if they had transferred from another place or whatever, but they're not finding dead bodies on a daily basis.
Because they probably knew her family.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Yeah, they very well might have known her.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's just, we never really talk about that, but I think it's important to mention because it does have a huge impact on all of those people. So they called FBI agent Matthew Zenz to testify on the information that was extracted from the MyFitnessPal app, which logged over 3,000 data points. And it showed which showed that she was walking at 3.8 miles an hour until 6:28 p.m., where she sends that freaking text that said, I think I almost got kidnapped, OMFG.
Right.
And then there's a spike up to 5 to 7 miles an hour. And then I've already talked about it, but they did this display, where they used like a Google Earth image and then showed her path that zigzagged all over through the woods and shit, as she was obviously trying to escape from this piece of shit. And then we had those 3 misdialed calls that we talked about that went to unknown numbers, but it was almost certainly as this poor girl was trying to call somebody to help her. And then at 6:44, everything stops. And that's where it stops, is right where her body was found. Yeah. And then after her death, it shows that the phone was then traveling about 22 miles an hour, which is motorcycle speed. And it was headed toward VanCallis's Wells Township home. And so, like I said, they showed this animation over the top of a Google Earth image. It actually lasted 63 minutes. It was created by Agent Zenz, and it visualized that whole path. It showed the timestamps of when everything was happening. And it showed the little icons that showed, what speed they were moving at any given time. And then the jury viewed it multiple different times. And then they showed that the phone was discarded in the woods, later to be found on July 25th. The defense cross-examined on the GPS margins, and they claimed that they couldn't be accurate as far as like speeds. And they gave their same old bullshit, try to tear down any piece of evidence that you possibly could. But then the prosecution talked about the cell phone records and the tower data that placed VanCallis's phone near the trail between 6:25 and 6:45, which overlapped April's. And then after 7, it showed the movements matched her phone's path. No call from his phone during the attack. And they subpoenaed records and showed that there were no deletions. And so they integrated that, the cell phone pings and all that kind of stuff, with the GPS data and the MyFitnessPal app. And so it just gives this hybrid timeline where they can pull all the different phone records, all the different cellular data that's out there, and basically just paint exactly, what happened that day. And then obviously they talked about VanCallis's internet history, the stuff that was taken from his computer, which was seized in August of 2014. Like I said earlier, it revealed searches on that computer of stuff like, quote, how to get a girl that doesn't like you to like you, and quote, what girls really want, and quote, why does this girl ignore me? And also the weird ass shit like how to get younger girls to like older guys, and all these weird ass freaking searches. Mm-hmm. And so the forensic experts testified on the timestamps and the relevance to the motives, such as coercion, basically grooming a young girl, his attraction to younger girls. And the defense argued that it was all generic information and completely unrelated to the crime. And then the prosecutor used all kinds of visuals. Already talked about like the animation and everything.
Unrelated.
Oh, yeah.
I can't even say the word.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
The fact that he's attracted to younger girls and is trying to figure out how to get younger girls to like him is completely unrelated to the fact that he attempted to rape a young girl.
Then it's related to other crimes, and he still needs to be put behind bars.
Right.
So, bye-bye.
So, like I said, the prosecutor used all kinds of visuals, the animation that I talked about, all kinds of different maps and stuff. And Zenza's testimony spanned days. So it took a long time. There was so much freaking data to talk about, so much information that this guy was on the stand for days as they questioned him and then had to put up with the defense's nonsense bullshit. And then the medical examiner testified. So Dr. Daniel Spitz, who completed the autopsy on January the 25th, he detailed the 48 injuries, blunt force to the head with a motorcycle helmet, stomping on her neck and face, which stomping on her neck is what caused the asphyxiation. Talked about the shoe impressions on her cheek and on her chest came from size 10 to 11. Talked about the specific tread and that it was a, Nike Air Jordan. So then he talked about how the clothing was displaced. She had abrasions to the genital area, which obviously showed an attempted sexual assault. He also testified that he placed the time of death between 6:30 and 6:45, which aligned with all of the data that they got from the app. And then they called the eyewitnesses, Eric Reschke, who said he saw April with a motorcyclist at 6:25 p.m., William Buchanan, who ID'd VanCallis on the motorcycle, Amy and Gail Spinella described his piercing eyes, and they're the ones that helped create the sketch. And Mary and Doug Stein noted his suspicious demeanor. And then her classmates who saw her talking to this strange guy on the motorcycle, talked about that interaction. And all of those testimonies corroborated the timeline, the appearance. I mean, they're just sealing this guy into this thing. Everybody that talks, everybody is agreeing too. There's, like I said before, it wasn't like an eyewitness that was like, oh, no. It was a guy with like real long hair, stringy hair, whatever. No, they all agreed it was this piece of shit, at least any that saw him without the helmet on. And then they called his girlfriend, Crystal Stadler, to the stand, and she testified that VanCallis left the home roughly 5 o'clock and didn't return until 8:30. And then when he did, he said to her, quote, "I messed up, need you to stand by me." And then she also testified that he then cleaned his shoes that night, which we talked about using hand sanitizer, which he'd never done before. And it's a pretty odd thing to be doing in general anyway. And then, they never found the shoes, but she also was able to testify that he had a pair of Air Jordans. And like I said, she had pulled up the picture from his Facebook account, or multiple pictures actually, that showed him wearing those very shoes. She talked about the hair and the grass that was in his hoodie, and the inconsistent statements were, any of his inconsistent statements were probed extensively by the prosecution. And, she basically on the stand explained that he was an abusive piece of shit. He was obviously they were in this weird on again, off again relationship where, it was described as an affair when she got pregnant with the other guy's baby. But when you really look at it, I wouldn't call it an affair. I mean, they weren't married. So it's not like they had to wait for divorce. And, when she was with this other guy, they were in one of their off again periods. So they were broke up. So I don't understand why it keeps being described as an affair, because I don't really think it was. But yeah. And whatever, it's neither here nor there. I just found it odd.
Yeah.
And then they talked about the contradictions with his alibi. No witnesses confirmed that he had stayed home. Matter of fact, they testified to the opposite of that. They talked about his prior record, which was introduced. There was quite a bit of limitations on what they were allowed to talk about as far as his prior record, but they could talk about anything that would point to a pattern of assaults and stuff. So they're not able to say he's a piece of shit that breaks into houses and stuff like that, because that's not relevant to this case.
Right.
But they could talk about assaults and anything like that, because obviously
it's a pattern.
It is, right. Yep. Then they talked about, finding discarded backpack in the woods with the fibers that matched his clothing. And then, the motorcycle, which matched. We talked about how they pulled they basically could track his phone exactly where he was going. And right when his phone said he was coming around the corner, they were able to pull home surveillance footage that showed that motorcycle going right in front of that home at the same time that his phone was going in front of that home. So, and then they called the crime scene experts, the technicians that testified to the drag marks, the blood splatter, talked about how that showed that there were several blows that were struck while she was standing, and then multiple more once she was on the ground. They couldn't say for sure, what the weapon was other than his feet, but they did say that it would match the motorcycle helmet. And, it's always that way. They can't say, oh, it was this motorcycle helmet unless they're able to find like her DNA or something on it, which they weren't. So is all they can say at that point is it's consistent with something like this motorcycle helmet,
Yeah.
And then obviously the shoe impressions, that's pretty freaking clear as to exactly what shoes caused these injuries. And then it was time for the defense. And so during their opening statement, Ancuni emphasized that there was no DNA, there was no fingerprints, no confession, only assumptions. And he argued that there were huge gaps in the circumstantial evidence, these generic searches that he had on his computer, and that it was a very common motorcycle type. And he suggested alternative suspects with some unvetted tips that came in. And he portrayed VanCallis as just an innocent guy that was out riding his motorcycle. And so he cross-examined Zenz, who again was the FBI agent, and he cross-examined him on the GPS inaccuracies, saying that, in rural areas, you have what's called signal drift. And so you can't really get an exact pinpoint on exactly where a person's at, especially out in rural areas. And he questioned the animation that they showed and said that it was a speculative movie, not proof. And he highlighted that there's no foreign apps or tampering on April's phone, which implies that there's no link between these two. There's no link between his client and this girl. And then, he probed the eyewitnesses and said that, this happened at dusk. It was getting too dark. They couldn't actually really see what they said they saw. Reschke said that he was about 50 feet away. And then the Spinellas said that they only got, a brief look at him. And so, he just did what they all do and just try to tear down all the witnesses and everything. And hey, he's a defense attorney and everybody's entitled to a defense. So, this is what they do. And they don't have much to stand on in this case, honestly, except he didn't do it and you can't prove he did.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, case closed.
Yeah, exactly. And so then he did call some experts to rebut, the prosecution's experts, and the defense forensic experts testified that the shoe association is weak. There's millions of Air Jordans out there. Yeah. And because they couldn't find his pair of Air Jordans, there's no DNA available. So that can't be relied upon. And then they also said that the computer searches were completely irrelevant. It was because he had broken up with his girlfriend and that he was, having some angst because of that. And so it was no motive at all. It was completely unrelated. And then they called family members and friends, who said that, he was home intermittently, and their stories continue to change throughout this. We already talked about it when his brother was like, oh yeah, he was there. And then no, he wasn't there. And his brother said, oh, I lost my cell phone. I don't even have one. And then the cop called it and he had it like in his freaking pocket or whatever. I mean, yeah, but anyway, his attorney closed with the plea that, quote, coincidences don't equal guilt. So then it was time for the closing arguments. The prosecution closed and Smith recapped the whole timeline that they had laid out with all the tech experts and everything. And they said that that was, quote, undeniable path to guilt, end quote. I agree 100%.
Right.
Obviously, he urged the jury to connect the dots. His presence plus a motive plus his behavior equals a guilty piece of shit. And then he made an emotional appeal to the jury saying, quote, justice for April, stomped like trash, end quote.
Yeah.
And then Ann Cooney, reiterated the voids in the evidence. There's no direct proof. He warned against convicting his client on maybes and emphasized that there is a presumption of innocence. So then it was turned over to the jury. The jury was sent out to deliberate, and they requested some exhibits. They asked to see the animation video again. They wanted to look at the sketches. They wanted to look at the phone records, and they deliberated for less than 5 hours. And then they said, okay, we're ready.
Wow.
And so that's either, if you're a defendant, that's either really, really good news or really, really bad news for you.
Yeah.
One of the two. I mean, whether you're the defense or the prosecution, a jury deliberating for a short period of time like that. I mean, it was around 5 hours. So it's not like it was, 30 minutes, but still it's pretty short for deliberations. So it's never a good sign. It means there ain't no hung jury here.
Yep.
They've reached a conclusion, and it didn't take them a whole long time to do it. So then the jury came back, and this was on February 5th, 2016, and they reached a verdict of guilty, you piece of shit. And then once this piece of shit's found guilty, then it's time to give, the victim impact statements, which are always really tough. But, April's family members provided victim impact statements, focusing on April's character, their loss, and their absolute hatred for James VanCallis Jr. And I can certainly understand that. And so Jennifer Millsap, April's mom, testified calmly but tearfully on her last interactions with April when April left for that walk sometime around 6 p.m. And they shared, their routine texts with each other and stuff like that. She described April as my baby, saying she was bright, kind, loved animals, and wanted to be a veterinarian. She recounted the panic that she felt when April failed to return from her walk, how she went and searched the trail, and the horror that she went through once the body was identified and everything. And then she said, quote, to this piece of shit, quote, you took my baby from me. I hate you with every ounce of my being, end quote. And, she talked about the profound grief that she was going through, sleepless nights, her empty home, missing milestones like graduation and weddings and everything. She emphasized Penny, April's dog, as the hero who stayed with her body. And then
that breaks my heart.
Oh, this whole thing, it's even hard to talk about it.
I know.
It really is. David Lickenfeld, her stepfather, whatever he was, we said at the beginning that we were just going to call him her stepfather because he was, whether he officially was or not. He was there. He supported Jennifer in court. He testified about the family dynamics, that April had a supportive household, talked about April's daily life, talked about the emotional impact that it had once they were notified that April was gone. Talked about how they, arrived at the scene and said that it was a loss of a, quote, beautiful girl. And he highlighted the impact on the entire community. And then Austin Albertson, who was her boyfriend, testified about, receiving that text message. I think almost got kidnapped, OMFG. Then he broke down emotionally when he was recalling their last conversations and plans that they had. And he described April as loving and fun. And it talked about how traumatic it was. And I can't even imagine, like, this poor freaking kid is probably still dealing with this shit.
Yeah.
Probably for the rest of his life, because he talked about, you know, the emotional trauma of getting that text message, but then
And ignoring it.
how guilty he felt for not responding faster. And they said that, you know, when he was giving his testimony and everything, the jury was visibly shaken by his testimony, you know?
They probably all wanted to give him a hug.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, you know, extended family also talked. Relatives like aunts, uncles provided written statements that were read aloud, and they focused on April's church involvement, her kindness, their collective grief, which was expressed as being a shattered family. And they emphasized the randomness, which just amplified the pain because it could have been any child. It was just completely random. And so, you know, there was tears from the family. The jury was crying. I mean, yeah, this is unbelievably touching and heart-wrenching. And I don't even know really I don't even know what to say. I mean,
Yeah, I was trying to think of another word and it wasn't coming to me.
awful, you know?
That's not strong enough.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the jury found this piece of shit guilty. The courtroom was packed. April's family was there, her mom, her stepfather. They all wept with relief when this asshat was found guilty. VanCallis remained totally expressionless. He didn't show any kind of emotion, either positive or negative.
Wes?
You know, Judge Brennan commended the jury for their thorough review of the complex circumstantial evidence. And, you know, the one thing that just really stood out to me in this case as I was researching it is, in this day and age of DNA and forensics, and, you know, we talk about it so much, and, you know, how juries now really have come to expect, if not absolutely demand, forensic evidence in a case. And it's interesting how all through all of the research, everything you read about this case says, you know, that, I don't know, it's almost like maybe they got it wrong, or, I mean, they don't really say that, but that's kind of hidden in there. It's kind of insinuated because there was no DNA evidence or anything. And it's funny because 40 years ago, this would have been a freaking slam dunk.
Yeah.
Like, there would have been no question, because everything, all of the convictions pre, you know, 1990, for the most part, were all circumstantial cases. You know, maybe we had fingerprints and shit like that and eyewitnesses, but a lot of convictions were more circumstantial than this one. So I don't know. It doesn't mean anything. I just found it interesting and wanted to comment on it. So then the sentencing hearing was then held on March 30th of 2016, again in Macomb County, before Judge Brennan, and it lasted for several hours. And this obviously is when all the victim impact statements and all that kind of stuff were given. The prosecution argued for the maximum penalty. Hell yes. The defense pleaded for leniency, and VanCallis was there in a suit, but he was shackled. His family was present. April's family was present. All of her supporters. I mean, the courtroom was absolutely packed, and a whole bunch of them were wearing pink because, as you remember, that was her favorite color. So then the judge said, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for both murder counts, first degree premeditated and felony, and those are going to run concurrently. So not consecutive. So he only has to do life once.
Only once.
Only once. We can't dig him up like Oliver Cromwell or anything and behead him after the fact. He only has to die one time.
Not enough.
Not enough. But then she also, after he dies, then he also has to still serve out a 40 to 60 year sentence, which, like I said, this is consecutive. So the 2 life sentences are concurrent, but this one is consecutive. So after he dies, he still owes us 40 to 60 years for kidnapping and 10 to 15 years for assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct. So the way that she structured this piece of shit's not getting out.
Yeah.
He is going to die in prison.
Apparently his ashes will be in an urn in a cell somewhere.
Right. So there was no fines or restitution that was ordered. Sometimes they do that, and it's kind of funny because they're never going to freaking pay it off. But that wasn't the case here. Judge Brennan justified the sentence by saying it was an absolutely heinous crime. April suffered 48 injuries, including skull fractures from blunt force, likely from a helmet, neck compression, stomping on her caused asphyxiation. The judge described the attack as brutal and vicious against a vulnerable 14-year-old girl who was just out walking her dog. And then she also said that the unprovoked attack on a public trail shattered Armada's sense of safety. It was, like we've said, the first murder in decades, and it heightened public fear, and that warranted a severe penalty. And then she talked about this piece of shit's absolute lack of remorse. Absolutely no apology or statement during the trial or the sentencing. His demeanor was stoic throughout. She talked about his prior criminal record of home invasions, the child support violation, the drug charges, which indicated that he was very likely to reoffend if she ever let him out in society again.
Fine, upstanding gentleman.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And so she said that she deemed life without parole as necessary to prevent any further violence, given this piece of shit's history and the severity of the crime. So, I mean, it was obvious she never wanted this piece of shit out on the street again.
Right.
And so, we can sleep soundly, barring some weird ass thing that he's going to die in prison. So at least at least something good came out of it.
Yeah.
And then, so we need to then talk about the shock that the community went through with all this. So, you told us about Armada and, Macomb County. It's like you said, it's a village of like 17 people, a tiny little place.
Tiny.
Facing its first murder in decades. And it was a 14-year-old little girl that was just out walking her dog. So, the residents then were locking their cars and they weren't going outside. And we talked about it, Nick. Kids weren't allowed to go out and go on walks, and kids weren't allowed to play outside and all of that kind of stuff. So,
well, and they're realizing a dog isn't a deterrent. I mean, I don't know. I don't remember how big Penny was, but
she's a border collie.
Okay.
So
it still should have been somewhat of a deterrent, though.
Right.
But it wasn't.
And, I think that also speaks to this piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
So the Macomb County Trail, where all of this terrible shit happened, was closed for a while after the murder. And then once they reopened it, the sheriff's department increased their patrols. They also installed new lighting fixtures and had surveillance cameras installed along key sections along the trail. And then community groups pushed for like the buddy system for walkers, and they promoted safety apps, like those apps that can share your location, live as you're walking and stuff like that. And they held a quote, take back the trail, in quote, multiple take back the trail walks to restore the public's confidence in, walking this trail and stuff. And signs were added that urged like vigilance, and local schools started talking about trail safety and that kind of stuff. And then the April Millsap Memorial Garden was created in May of 2015 near the trail's entrance, and it features benches and flowers and pink ribbons, and they have annual vigils there on July 24th, and it draws hundreds of people with candles and They pray and they offer tributes. And they also had community dog walks and fundraisers, which honored April's love for animals. The Armada Fair dedicated events to her with like pink themed booze and moments of silence. Pink ribbons were on trees and fences and signs all across town. And, obviously widespread grief gripped Armada. Residents reported sleepless nights, dealing with anxiety, PTSD-like symptoms. Armada Middle School opened for counseling on July 26th, right after her murder, to offer aid to students and their families, which obviously included her poor little boyfriend.
Yeah.
St. Mary Mystical Rose Catholic Church hosted prayer services, which drew huge crowds. And then the long-term effects of this are, in this area, trust in strangers totally eroded, but the community unity grew through all these memorials and everything that I've talked about. Some families relocated temporarily, others joined neighborhood watches, and healing efforts included, like I said, the therapy sessions and public discussions on safety. After losing April, Jennifer, her mom, became a vocal advocate. She attended, like we said, every trial session in 2016 and delivered her victim impact statement. And then her work focuses on protecting children and educating about the justice system, particularly the role of circumstantial evidence and technology in convictions. She promoted the use of tracking apps like the MyFitnessPal app, which was inspired by April's phone data solving the case. She'd go on to speak at schools, vigils, community events, and urged parents to teach stranger danger and to use the buddy system and to monitor the kids' routes. And she collaborated with local foundations to organize safety workshops. And then, she was very much involved in all of the stuff that happened at the trail and all the different things that we talked about as well. So then we also got to talk about Penny. So
Penny the dog.
Penny stayed with April's body after her death, refused to leave her, and it was her whimpering and acting funny and everything that alerted the joggers, of what had happened, allowed her body to be found. Like I said earlier, the Millsap family called Penny a hero for guarding April, for alerting the others, and for preventing any further scene disturbances, because they were able to find her, really quickly after the fact. And because of that, the scene was as preserved as it possibly could have been. So Penny's story was featured in news reports and true crime shows. I mean, shit, we're talking about it right now. Community events. And, it really, all of us really emphasize her role in the case. And because they were able to find April's body so soon and everything, that really adds to them being able to solve this case.
Yeah.
And so she also inspired pet safety campaigns, which is like dog collars that have trackers in their collar. And it symbolized Armada's collective trauma. Residents saw Penny as a reminder of what was lost, but also about resilience.
Yeah.
And so, ongoing, there are, like we said, there's the annual memorial walks. They always include dogs, which honors Penny's loyalty. Her image adorned fundraisers, and stories of her actions were shared in schools, which really reinforced April's animal-loving legacy.
Yeah. That's sweet.
Also, the April Millsap Memorial Scholarship was created to honor her, and it's managed by the 4-County Community Foundation, and it awards funds annually to Armada High School seniors. Recipients reflect April's kindness, animal love, or veterinary aspirations, and that scholarship is funded by community donations, and it supports college-bound students keeping April's dream alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about, the memorial garden and everything that was created. The 10-year anniversary of her death, which was just last year, it drew, there was huge community gatherings, renewed calls for safety, tributes to her, tributes to Penny, and social media groups maintain her legacy, sharing stories and safety tips and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of positive came from this unbelievable tragedy.
Mm.
4 episodes, dozens of witnesses, a tangled mess of digital footprints, shifting stories, and one monstrous decision that turned a peaceful trail into a murder scene. But through all of it, through the horror, the outrage, the media storms, the courtroom theater, the truth never changed. April Millsap was a child. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't sneaking out, getting into trouble, or putting herself at risk. She was walking her dog in her neighborhood, something any of us would have seen as routine and mundane and safe. And in the time it took for the sun to dip below the trees, her life was stolen by a man who had no reason, no justification, and no humanity. We've walked through the evidence, the cell tower triangulation, the GPS data, the foot impressions, the conflicting alibis, the disturbing online searches. We laid it all bare, not to glorify evil, but to show exactly how it was identified, cornered, and ultimately held to account. We showed how technology became April's voice, how her phone, her MyFitnessPal app, her digital shadow screamed the truth when she couldn't. And we showed how law enforcement, often criticized and at times rightfully so, rose to the occasion, meticulously following the trail that she left behind until it led to James VanCallis Jr., a man with a history of violence, a pattern of deception, and a warped sense of entitlement that turned fatal. But this case wasn't just about evidence. It was about people, about a mother whose world stopped on that July day and never truly started again, about friends who couldn't make sense of the silence, about an entire community that painted murals, held vigils, and whispered her name like a prayer when justice felt too far away. The system, when pushed hard enough, can get it right. Evil doesn't always get to walk away, and that no matter how meticulous the lie, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. But don't mistake justice for healing. That's the lie that we often tell ourselves, that once the gavel falls and the sentence is read, the story is over. It's not. Not for April's family, not for those who knew her, not for anyone who looks at that trail and remembers what it cost to make it feel safe again. April's story isn't just one of tragedy, it's one of resilience, of a family that refused to let her name be buried alongside the horror, of a dog who stayed by her side in her final moments, of strangers who became advocates, and of a small town that learned how to scream into the void until someone, somewhere, finally listened. There's a reason that we do this, why we keep pulling these stories into the light, no matter how much darkness they hold. It's not just for justice, it's not just for answers, it's for the Aprils of the world, the ones who deserve decades, not minutes, the ones whose stories were cut short, but still deserve to be heard in full. And so we carry that weight forward, not because it's easy, but because someone has to. Because if we don't, silence wins. And April Millsap, she deserves better than silence. Before we close, we want to return to the only name that ever really mattered in this story, April Marie Millsap. She was just 14 years old, but the way people talk about her, her light, her wit, her strength. You'd think that she'd lived 100 years. Maybe it's because she left such a deep mark on everyone around her, or maybe it's because she never really left them at all. April wasn't a headline. She wasn't a trial. She wasn't a case file. She was a daughter, a friend, a student, a protector. She loved animals. She walked her dog with the kind of freedom you only feel when you're young and the world still feels like it's yours. She was whip smart and silly, strong-willed and kind. She had dreams, real ones, big ones, the kind that could have taken her anywhere if someone hadn't stolen that future from her. Her mother, Jennifer, has carried this loss with a grace and strength that no parent should ever be asked to summon. She didn't just lose her child, she lost her world. And yet, she's spoken, stood up, and sat through the agonizing trial, all so that April would never become just another girl in a courtroom photo. April's mom wasn't alone in that fight. Deanna, her mother's partner, was more than a stepfather. He was a dad in every way that counted. The kind of man who stood beside her mom, not just in grief, but in determination, who loved April like his own and fought for her like it too. April's friends remember her with the kind of laughter that turns into tears when it won't stop echoing in empty hallways. They talk about her fiercely protected nature, her sarcastic sense of humor, her passion for helping others, even when she didn't quite know how big her heart really was. And then there's the community, the neighbors, the teachers, the law enforcement officers, the strangers turned advocates who painted murals and planted gardens, lit candles, and wore her name like armor. For a small town, this kind of wound doesn't fade, but neither does the pride, the stubborn, unflinching pride in a young girl who showed them what innocence really looked like and why it was worth protecting. April's dog Penny survived the attack that took her best friend. And somehow, in her silent, loyal way, Penny became a symbol of devotion, of witness, of a bond that not even death could sever. That trail they walked together is no longer just a stretch of asphalt through the woods. It's a sacred space now, a memorial, a reminder. Because April Millsap wasn't forgotten. She's etched into the fabric of that town, into the hearts of every mother who now hesitates before letting her child go out of sight, into every teenager who learned that the world isn't always fair, but it can be made to listen, into the soul of a justice system that, for once, got it right. But most of all, she lives in the people who loved her and refused to let that love be silenced. April's story should have been longer. It should have been filled with college visits and awkward prom photos and first jobs and maybe someday a family of her own. But because that story was cut short, we have to tell the part that she left behind. Not the horror, the heart. That's what she gave the world. That's what we remember. That's what we carry forward. April Marie Millsap. Forever 14, forever loved, forever missed. That brings us to the end of our series on April Millsap. Her story, like so many others, reminds us why we do this. Not for headlines, but for the voices stolen too soon. April was more than a case. She was a life interrupted. And it's on all of us to keep telling her story after the courtrooms go quiet.
If this series resonated with you, please like, follow, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It's a simple action that helps these stories reach more ears and more hearts.
Want to get involved? Join the Adopt a Victim program to support families directly, or become part of the Dark Dialogue Collective, our boots-on-the-ground effort to push cases forward and uncover new leads. You can find all the information on those programs at www.darkdialogue.com. You can also support us on Patreon or on Ko-fi. Every contribution goes straight back into telling these stories that matter.
And don't forget to subscribe on Substack to get behind-the-scenes case breakdowns, research files, and extended content. It's the best way to stay connected to our ongoing work and help bring these cases into the light.
If you have questions, critiques, kudos, or case suggestions, we want to hear from you. Email us anytime at info@darkdialogue.com. We read every message, and your insight helps shape what we do next.
Thank you for standing with us and with April. Together, we keep their names alive.
Until next time, keep the dialogue alive, always and forever.